For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter.
Well, welcome back to Dunkin' Donuts. And here today, along with our donut salesman over there.
Coffee Colada!
Ooh, coffee colada. So we have Rodney from Watch It Played. How you doing, Rodney?
Great, man. Sorry, just got a donut in my mouth here.
Oh, no problem. What are your favorite? What are you eating there today?
It's chocolate-covered sprinkles. It's got a little cream filling in there.
Nice.
Delicious. A little messy. It's the only problem. It's a little
Can
messy.
I get you coffee? What do you like to drink with that?
Just black coffee.
Oh, ooh, man.
Ooh,
I like that.
Man. He's a man.
You can tell he's a videographer. Real videographers all drink black coffee.
Clearly. He's a man's man, Canadian videographer.
Right.
Arr.
Right.
Arr. He's probably even a lumberjack.
Yeah.
Well, we thought it'd be great. Rodney here, you feature your kids in a lot of these videos. And I've talked a lot on the show about gaming with my girls, who are ages 8 and 9. And we thought, and Rodney had the idea, well, you guys have talked about on the show before gaming with young kids, and what are great games for really young kids to get started with. But how do you move your kids or encourage your kids to play the more quote-unquote serious, right, with air quotes, serious gamer games, and how do you get them to like those, right? So I guess before we get to there, though, what is quote-unquote serious? What's a serious game, Rodney?
Well, we're kind of plucking this term out of the air, aren't we? Like, serious. I never know what to call these games that we play. When people ask me, what do you mean you play board games? What kind of board games? I still don't feel like I've quite got the name for it. Mm-hmm. Right. Is it designer board games? I mean, all games are designed by a designer. So, right. I don't know. But I think, Twilight Imperium is a serious game, right? So,
right.
That is about as serious as it gets.
Right. We don't have any debates about that. But, what about Hey, That's My Fish? You guys know that game, mm-hmm. Hey, That's My Fish? Right?
I do, yes.
Yeah. Is that a serious game? Well, I think it is, despite the name. I think it is a serious game. Because, now, not to knock on other games, like Candyland and Monopoly and Snakes and Ladders and all that sort of thing.
You can knock on those.
We can all agree that we can knock on Candyland.
Yes,
okay, cool. All right. So, these kind of games, we're rolling dice, we're moving where the dice tell us, and then we're doing what the spot we landed on tells us to do, basically, right? So we're not problem solving, we're not making several distinct choices, etc. So serious gaming to me is when your child is forced to make choices, and they're not all equally good, and by making better choices, they will be better players, and they'll do better.
Right.
So it's not that there aren't elements of randomness, like lots of dice games. Elder Sign, for instance, you roll lots of dice, but you have to make decisions. What dice do I keep? Which ones do I throw away? When do I use my cards?
Right, even zombie dice, something as simple as that, still has that pressure luck element of a decision-making process.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I go back to, Hey, That's My Fish, too, because I got to move my fish, my penguin, how far do I move it? Am I trapping someone else? Are they going to be able to trap me? So you have to think about all those kind of things, right? So I guess that's what we mean. Is that what we mean by serious games? I think we do.
Yeah, I think so. I think the other term people throw around is hobby games, right? But I always get in trouble with hobby games because every game's a hobby, really. But I think the idea is games that you have to sort of commit a bit more to play. And games that traditionally weren't sold in big box stores, but of course now that's starting to change too. But and I agree. To me, and I don't know, maybe Craig, you can jump in on this too. But to me, it's any game that has sort of some of those mechanical elements that are starting to teach your kids about the more advanced mechanical elements you sort of expect in a board game.
Yeah, I would say any of those games that have more depth to them than a very basic. I would say Rodney's hit the nail on the head. These decision games that are based on decision making, where the decisions have like knock-on ramifications as you go deeper into the game. That's how I would say is a perfect way to say it.
Right.
Okay. I was thinking about this, preparing for this, why do it? Why try to make your kid? I mean, there's selfish reasons.
Because you owe them payback.
Good point.
Why curse our children to a life of serious gaming? One thing, I was talking to my daughter about this. My daughter is, I'll give you guys a little bit of background. My son is 7 right now, Luke, my son, and my daughter, Andrea, she's 16. So different ages in gaming there, but we game together as a family. My wife likes to game as well.
That's great.
But games are social, right? They teach problem-solving techniques, teach logic, and they're fun for the adults too, right? But the thing that struck me as I was talking to my daughter about it was that they're an equalizer, right? It's unlikely that a 7-year-old is going to beat a 17-year-old in a game of basketball, right?
Right.
Good point.
The odds are totally stacked against the 7-year-old.
Right.
But Luke, my 7-year-old son, has beat me in more games than I will ever care to admit on this podcast or anywhere. Okay, so it puts them in an arena where they can be in control of their decisions, and I think it builds confidence, right?
Right, it does.
So I think games are unique that way. So I think that's a good reason to encourage your children to play serious games. I think those are some of the benefits. Perhaps.
Well, I agree. I think the benefits are really. Or many. That's one of them. I think there's definitely a parenting moment that happens where your kid realizes that you're encouraging them to try to beat you, which normally they're not in an arena where that's allowed to happen, right? Normally,
right.
All your decisions are final, basically, and and you explain them to the kids, but basically that's the way it works. Whereas in a game mode, all of a sudden they're free within the parameters of the game to do what they want without mom or dad telling them what to do, and it might even turn out to be better than what mom or dad are thinking of doing, and I can actually, get a chance to do that. And also there's so many great, and this is one of the things, it's kind of funny, my mom used to joke about this back when, in the 80s when we used to play Dungeons & Dragons, there was this big backlash against D&D, like it's all role-playing as a psychological tool, and, they're worshiping Satan, and my mom actually
sat down. Yeah, I was in that family.
So my mom actually sat down once with us, because my mom was a kindergarten teacher. She said, all right, show me this game. Show me what you do. So she sat down with us for a couple hours and actually watched my brother and I and a couple of our friends play this game. And she said, I don't understand the problem here. You all sat down at a table and you willingly did accounting, did math, did planning, did project management. You just did all this stuff. You read, you literally devour whole books. What is wrong with this? This is like the best teaching aid ever. And with a lot of games, there's probabilities, the statistics, there's all this subtext going on here. That there's a lot of educational value in a lot of these advanced games that simply don't exist in the, in Candyland or Monopoly, where it's really down to, how far do you move and what do you do when you get there? And I think that's really, not to mention the social element of being able to explain what you want in a trading game like Settlers. You have to kind of articulate why you want that and why they should give it to you, because as soon as you say to mom, can I have some wool, your sister's going to say, no, I want to have the wool instead, and explain all the reasons why you shouldn't get it. So now you've got a social contract negotiation thing going on there, which again, when you're talking about kids that are 6, 7, or 8, there's a lot of learning to be done in that area.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You're teaching them how to be persuasive,
right.
and those tools just carry on, right?
Right. Exactly. So how do you get them started in this? I mean, do you sit them down with like Twilight Imperium and go at it?
No, I'm taking notes for future use, by the way.
Excellent. Well, let's see if we can help out with that. I mean, I think no. I think you were leading me with that question, Russ. Yeah, probably don't want to.
Oh, he's got you pegged.
But I think, now the first part of the suggestion is going to be, brain-numbingly obvious, but you've got to keep it fun, right? You've got to keep it fun. Now, the thing is, though, I think this is the part maybe sometimes as gamers, as enthusiastic gamers, we sometimes miss, is you've got to keep it fun for them.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's easy to get excited about a game that you're excited about and expect that to just translate right away, but that doesn't always happen. And I think it's the most important and perhaps the most nuanced part of this whole thing, because we're not trying to make them eat carrots and peas here, right? Or finish off their math homework. We're right. Spending time hopefully sharing a fun experience that can come from being challenged by a game. So I mean, I think that's part of it. You want to be careful not to fall into that state of desperation or exasperation when they're not getting it, when they're not getting what's fun about it. Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly right.
And I think sometimes what you have to do is you have to sense where that gaming process is not being fun and try to counterbalance it rather than force it. So the best example I can think of is when a game requires some kind of math that is interfering with the killing monsters part of the game that the little gamer is enjoying.
Right.
Don't remove the math necessarily, but jump in there and make it easier. Maybe you do it for them the first few games you play with them. But then start giving them little incentives to take the math on themselves. Like maybe even something outside of the game rules, like, hey, if you can solve this armor versus damage math, then you'll get an in-game reward of some kind. You make it fun that solving this is getting me something. Even if I solve it and I find out, I didn't beat the monster, I'm still getting something for having made the effort. So
yeah,
and look, we can get all high and mighty about this, but I don't think we're any different as adult gamers, right? Because if a game doesn't feel fun, we don't want to play either, right?
Well, one of the things that makes games fun too, and this is something I sort of figured out by watching my kids actually, is the kids really want to feel like they've mastered the concepts of the game. And my kids, anyway, don't like to feel like you're feeding them information or leading them through the game. This came to life when my oldest daughter, not too long ago, well, about a year ago now, we first sat down at the table with Castle Ravenloft when it first came out. I got her to the table with it. My oldest daughter fell in love with it, right, when it first came out. She had already learned to read, and she was totally into it. She got into the whole idea of it, the concept of it, the monster cards, analyzing them. Well, I tried to teach my younger daughter, and this is right at the point, when it first came out, it was right at the point when she was just starting to read. She wasn't a strong reader. And she got we said, oh, no problem, we'll explain what the monster cards do. And she got very frustrated because she couldn't do any of the tactical thinking in the game because she couldn't analyze which attack do I do on this monster. And even though we kind of were helping her, walking her through it, she didn't like it at all. And so she started not to like it. So she said, I don't like that game, and she didn't play with it for a long time. And then about 6 months ago, I finally convinced her to try it again, and she got totally into it. And she's reading the cards, and she's explaining. She's like, I'm not going to do this. And she's actually verbalizing all her thinking. You can see her eyes are lighting up. She's totally getting it. And I realized it wasn't fun for her to be led around. She wanted to really have... So I think it's really important when you're figuring out what games to play with. It's really important to be at a level where the child has a chance to master the skill sets of the game, or at least come very, very close to mastering them, so they feel like they own their decisions and not being sort of walked through it.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, they're handheld through the whole thing, then it feels like they're just doing what you want, or they're not playing the game the way they would want to. And if they can't make the decisions, then that makes perfectly good sense. I think that. And it's neat because you saw the whole thing come alive for her, right? When she was able to...
I did. When she first got down, she's like this huge fan of the game, just as much as my older daughter. Mm-hmm. But for a while, I thought that she was just that's not her thing, So it's really interesting to see that go through. And that really cemented the idea that there's certain, I guess, in my head, there's maybe educational points where kids can move to the next level of games. Well, obviously, reading's a big one of those, right? But there's other ones where it's like just certain critical thinking kicks in at certain ages, and when that does, and it's different for every kid, so it's not always 8 and up or 6 and up, but at certain times you realize your kid has just hit the point now where they can handle a whole other group of games. Right. And that's what happened with Ticket to Ride for us. There was a time when Ticket to Ride seemed a little beyond their grasp, but all of a sudden, boom, that game became simple for them, and they love it. So there's sort of those magic points. One other thing we wanted to talk about is, I wanted to mention this, is definitely, and you hinted at this too, is like, it's got to be fun for them. And one of the things I think that makes it fun for them is it's got to be an area that they're interested in.
Right. Yeah.
This is something I think I talked about before when I first was introducing my kids to role-playing games. My first impulse was Dungeons and Dragons. Of course, it's the classic. It's how everybody started. They'll love it. And then when I started talking to them about the idea with Dungeons and Dragons, they're kind of like, okay, maybe, And this is before Wrath of Shardalon, Ravenloft, and everything. But then I realized they were devouring these books about the Disney fairies, and then there's these other fairy books. There's this whole line of colored fairies and rainbow fairies, and they were just into the whole fairy world. They just thought that was awesome. And I realized that I've talked about before on the show, this Fairies Tale role-playing game. And I thought, well, if they like fairies so much, and so I just explained the concept of the game, and they were totally, totally sold. Mm-hmm. And now they love it, and to the point where they ask to play it every weekend, and we have this ongoing campaign, and I think it really comes down to it's got to be something that it's got to be a thing that really interests them at a core level, So, like if you want to play a card game with your kids, and if they love the Pokemon show, Pokemon's not a bad call, right? It's got a lot of interesting elements to the game. So it's like that's I think you got to kind of find an area that they're going to really latch onto theme-wise, just like adult gamers will too. If you're not a fantasy guy, a fantasy-themed board game is going to do nothing for you, and just if you're a sci-fi guy, you're probably like Battlestar Galactica. Same thing with kids. You got to keep it in the wheelhouse they're enjoying, right?
This is exactly what my daughter told me to emphasize during this segment. She said, for me, Dad, it's about the theme. It has to be, I think the theme is the shoehorn, right? It's like it gets the kid into the game enough that if it gets a little challenging rules-wise, if the theme is interesting and exciting, then it becomes worth getting over the hump of understanding what the rules and some of the strategy is. So, yeah, I definitely echo that. Really successful finding games when they interest my child, then they will play it, and they'll work through some of the more difficult rules issues for sure.
I think that's sort of the evil thing about that is the big box retailers know this, and so they come out with all these really bad games themed on things kids love, like My Little Pony, the board game. Well, my girls love My Little Pony. If there was actually a good My Little Pony board game on the level of Fishy Fish or Hey That's My Fish or something like that, I would play it with them, sure. But there's not. They're really, it's really like a card game that's really old made, with ponies on it. It's very rare to find a really well made yet kid friendly themed game. And so when I do, it's fantastic. And I kind of, HeroScape's a great example of something that managed to bridge that gap. And it would be great to see more manufacturers kind of realize, I would love to see Fantasy Flight Games get a major, kids IP. That would be, just really see some really interesting games put out in that IP as opposed to always being spoon-fed these really, really sort of awful reimaginings of, Monopoly, the 12th version for, The Amazing Spider-Man or whatever.
Yes. We've had a few of those go through this household as well, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Did you get the My Little Pony, Littlest Pet Shop mall shopping game? Oh, my God.
I've had some shopping games. I've had some Little Pet Shop. Yeah, everything. Everything's been through here.
It's funny.
You're right. The marketing gets them, and I fall for it, too. I'm hopeful that, maybe this will be something good too that I can enjoy as well, right? And
my fellow parents always laugh at me because they're like, oh, I see you got that Monopoly. You see you got My Little Pony shopping. How awful is that? And I'm like, you wouldn't believe how bad the mechanics are. And they're like, really? Is the problem the theme for you? I'm like, no, it's the mechanics. I mean, it's better. I wouldn't mind so much. So yeah, it's a shame that they can't get that through. So, but that just proves that's sort of the thing that proves the rule, right? If they could get that theme, if we had some really good games that were in those themes, that'd be fantastic, and hopefully we'll get more of those in the future as designer board games, as you say, will get more popular.
Yeah, for sure.
I hope. What about challenging games? Like, Rodney, how do you approach a more challenging game and get them to learn a challenging game? As I said, they don't have to be led through it. So how do you, if you've got a little more deep game, but your kids are really wanting to play because they've seen you play it or they like the theme or both, how do you recommend getting them into that kind of game?
Well, I mean, I guess I kind of alluded to it a little bit before. I try to either remove some of the barriers, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's just involving them in joining you for a game so they play with you. Now, that's not giving them the full experience of it, obviously, but if you can take some of the competition out of it so that they don't feel like they're on the line for making all the decisions, that can sometimes help. So they can just kind of see how the game works and see how it flows. And you can be kind of teaching them as you're making your own decisions. But another essential tool I found is modifying the rules. Remove the elements that are too complicated. The best example I have for this is when I was trying to teach Luke Carcassonne. Mm-hmm. Now, this is still a light game, but it is steering your kids towards those designer hobby games that many of us love, right? So you're placing tiles, you're matching tiles, you're connecting roads and cities, and it's visually appealing for kids, and they get a bunch of little meeples that they can play with, right? So, but the scoring and understanding the rules around farms can be hard even for adults on a first pass. So when I first played with Luke, we didn't play with the farm rules at all, and I realized if the listeners don't know what Carcassonne is, this may be a little bit foreign, but basically, it's a slightly more complicated scoring system. So by removing that, Luke was able to master everything else about the game, and feel like, and we could have still a very competent game of it as adults. And then it was just a matter of introducing that one element,
right? Once
everything else had been mastered. And the thing is, and I introduced this to Luke when he was 5. So when you have Luke at 5 learning a slightly modified version of Carcassonne, what's he going to be playing at 7? Right. So it's about having some of that patience and going, okay, I can't dump Twilight Imperium on him today, or even the full rules of Carcassonne, but this is a stepping stone, and you know what? Carcassonne without the farm rules is still fun, as it turns out. So if you can find maybe a challenging element in the game that can be plucked out and still leave a very good game, that might be a way of introducing something that doesn't overburden the child. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I had the exact same success with Carcassonne the same way. At the exact same age, actually, when Rose is 5, we started playing Carcassonne, and we started playing both the tabletop version and then also the Xbox version. And again, even on the Xbox version where it did the scoring for you, the farmer concept just confused her. It's just, what is that?
It confuses me.
It's very right. So removing that was great, and I had a similar experience more recently when she was I guess 7 or 8. Battleship Galaxies. She really saw me playing with the pieces and really wanted to try it. And the game is actually extremely straightforward and still a lot of fun if you remove the tactics cards. As soon as you pull the cards out, it's a fun, simple game. She got it. She got movement and everything. She understood the ship cards. But there's this extra level of complexity with the tactics cards. After we played a few times, then she started looking at the cards and going, how do those work? And then she was interested in that. But it didn't overwhelm her at first. So there's a lot of these games you can very easily look at components. And in fact, I think Galaxies even says, yank the cards out for younger players. But a lot of these games, you can look at them and go, if I just remove these 2 or 3 elements, it might affect game balance a little bit, but it also makes it much more playable and simple. Right. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it requires a certain amount of self-restraint on you as a parent because you're not playing the full game that maybe you'd want to play.
Right.
But I mean, I think having patience around things like that it can be really helpful in the long run. I mean, it's interesting when Luke was playing Carcassonne, and I heard that there was a Kids of Carcassonne game. We checked that out and realized this is too simple.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, we're past this now. And that was kind of neat. That was neat to find out. And I think, in conjunction with, having patience around how much you throw at your kids at once, one of the things I've tried to avoid, and I haven't done such a great job, but I'll be honest. So I guess I'm sharing my experience of where I failed a little bit, is I haven't been doing a very good job of avoiding the cult of the new, all the new games. So I'm often like showing Luke and Andrea new games when I get them, and I'm trying to play it with them. But I think it's better to play a game with them on several occasions if they're enjoying it before you hit them with your entire collection.
Right.
Because I think what happens is they end up learning, this game that I'm playing is fun, but there's another game coming around the corner. And so I think it works against their attention span a little bit. And I think attention span is a big deal when it comes to playing board games and that kind of stuff. So,
well, and I think that's a really important point. I think it's something that we as gamers also get, but then we sort of get all excited about the hype and we ignore it. We often talk about, even when Craig and I review a new game, we're like, and imagine after you've played it 6 or 7 times, you'll know all the subtleties and you'll anticipate your opponent doing this. And so we all as gamers think about that, the really high level of the metagame, and now we'll know, in Game of Thrones, now Stark's making this move, we know what happens there, so let's counter with that move, and you get all these really high level thinking. Well, kids can do the same thing in these games when they've played it enough and they're no longer challenged by the rules. And we have, I guess, 3 core go-to games that we probably play. Between the 3 of them, we play them probably weekly. And that is Survive Escape from Atlantis, Zularetto, and Fish Eat Fish. And those games come out whenever my wife and I will sit down long enough for the kids to get them in front of us. And they've got them to the point now. I mean, there's no rules reteaching. None of that is there. And it's simply a matter of, how are we going to gang up on Daddy now so he's the first sunk person and survive, before anybody else gets it. So it's like that kind of stuff. And they really, it's a lot of fun. And it's great to see some of those more sophisticated strategies and some things developing. So I think it's really important to keep letting when your kids come back to you with that same game, and you're like, oh. And it's funny because when they were younger, we had the Dora the Explorer Candyland. Right. Oh, my God. My wife and I had to play Dora the Explorer, and I was going to shoot myself. And now I feel so blessed that my biggest problem is that my daughter wants to play Fishy Fishing because that's a great bluffing, and screw your neighbor game. It's simple. Sure, it's not super complicated, but I'd rather play that 10 times than any of these other, Candyland types games. So it's great that they come back to that and reinforce the idea of family fun. And then once you do that once in a while and you play their games for them, you can be like, well, hey, maybe it's my turn to show you a new game. Okay, yeah, sure. And they can get into that and just maybe bring one in every so often and bring them in that way.
Well, I'm really glad to hear you've had success with that because that's something I feel like I need to work on. So I'm glad to hear that that's working out really well for you. So.
Yeah, well, the trick, too, is keep them with short games so they can just blast through them. We'll play your 2 or 3 games, and then we're going to go back. Elemini is another one. Oh, my daughters will play Eleminis till it gets pitch black.
Until the Elemini comes home?
Yeah, they love that game, I'll tell you what.
Nice.
The simple, fast card games. But the nice thing about Eleminis is, like, I was thinking this. I went camping last weekend, as an aside here, and I happened to, I don't know, I totally brain cramped. I brought no games with me. It was like I couldn't believe it. So I'm out there, and I know, right? I don't know what to do. There. So, but of course, being a campground, they have a little thing, and they have some stuff that they didn't have a little set of board games, but they had checkers and stuff, but they had a deck of cards. So I'm like, oh, let's play some card games, and I'm trying to think of card games for their level. So we're doing like Crazy Eights and things like that. I'm like, man, LMAs would just add a nice little level to this. I'm like, why didn't I bring that deck? So it's kind of funny how you can just bring, some of those games bring a little bit more to your stuff. I'm sure listeners are going to email me a bunch of great card games with standard cards for kids that I couldn't think of at the time. But yeah, always have your Hoyle book of card games with you too. It's another tip. So what are some of so let's say, okay, so we got them a game and we think they're going to like it. What are some teaching techniques? How do you sort of take them through the game? I mean, especially since you do so many videos on teaching games, what do you find are the best ways to get your kids to kind of walk through a game with you and get the basics down?
It's like a whole big topic, isn't it? I mean, teaching games it's not easy, first of all, not necessarily anyway, but I found got two little problems. First of all, no one wants a sermon, right? No one wants to be talked to for an hour as you explain all the rules to them. At the same time, people generally don't want to be in the dark about what's going on either. Right? So they want to know what's going on. They want you to explain to them, but they don't want you to talk for an hour either. Mm-hmm. So I find that you usually have to do one or the other and sacrifice the other. So with children, I tend to lean more towards keeping them in the dark about everything. So I will focus more on what's immediately in front of us. I'll usually give them, here's the objective of the game. I'll give them at least that much of the big picture. Right. Like, this game requires whoever gets the most points wins. Or we have to go in the dungeon and defeat the monster. Something like that. But then I find I will focus on, here's what we're doing first. And here's what we have to focus on. And I'll just walk through. And I try to make everything seem simple. So, because if you do it one step at a time, it does often feel simple, right?
Right.
So it helps if you have a good command of the game as well before you start. I used to, I never made a habit of it because I learned pretty quickly. I don't teach my kids the game when I'm learning the game. No, I don't do that with adults generally either. But
I was going to say that's a good rule of thumb for everyone.
Yeah, it is. It is. Sometimes you'll get an enthusiastic gamer who's willing to sort of suffer through it with you. But yeah, I definitely avoid that with the kids because that can just suck all the life. And all the fun out of the game. So that's definitely something. I find doing a step at a time has been helpful to me. What about you, Russ? Like, do you find that there's certain things your girls will like?
Because Russ is a big picture guy. So Russ, how do you do it?
Well, my absolute, and you're going to like this one, Rodney. My absolute favorite game teaching experience was the card game Kingdom Hearts. We went out and because my kids are huge Disney fans, and so Kingdom Hearts, well, it's like Pokemon, but with Disney characters. It's a little more complicated than Pokemon, but it's great. And so so we went out, we got the starter decks, blah blah blah. Well, it turns out inside the starter decks of Kingdom Hearts is a mini DVD, and brilliant. You put this in your DVD player, and it teaches the game. Wow. And it was fantastic because we sat down and watched it. It's Fantasy Flights, it's fully produced, blah blah blah. All this, and it showed the rules, and we're playing. And my daughter's correcting me. That's not what she said in the video, Dad. She said this. And so they love that part of the element of that. So if you're lucky enough to have a video of the game, like someone does Watch It, Play It or something, you can go watch the video with the kids because they actually like that because kids love to learn with their parents. They think that's something they really enjoy doing. And so if you sit down with them and make it a cooperative learning experience, that's part of learning the game. So I think that's a lot of fun. But you're right. You can't sit down and explain the whole thing. So what I'll do it in bite-sized chunks, as you suggested. I'll go through and say, okay, this part, here's the setup. We'll set everything up, and let's just play a turn. And sometimes I'll even say, we're going to play 2 or 3 turns, because I usually don't teach them any kind of long game, right? So if we're going to play Survive, I'll say, we'll play 2 or 3 turns, and then we're going to reset the game. So it doesn't count, right?
I like that.
And that way there's no, because it kind of removes that whole, I don't want to be in the dark. It's like we're all in the dark right now, and this isn't going to count, so Dad can't get any kind of huge advantage on you. We're going to do 2 or 3 turns. Everybody get it? Now, sometimes they'll say, let's keep playing. I get it now, and it's a real simple game they're going on. Sometimes they'll say, okay, let's start over. And then now they get it, and they can go forward that way. That usually works pretty well. But I try to keep the real trick is I try to, if I'm reading the rules to a game, and I, as an adult, can't get it, like, really quickly, like in 15 minutes reviewing the rules, it might be too complicated. It depends on the age level of your kids, but it might be too complicated for some younger kids, right? So I like to be able to say, like Fish Eat Fish or Survive, those kind of games where the core mechanics are so straightforward, and it's really down to some nuances in the game. Those are great games to teach kids. But then again, I've had success also with things like Zoo Loretto and stuff that at first blush might look a little more complicated. So it really just depends on how it can stage and how it can teach them the game and go through in baby steps. But I think the key again is baby steps. And again, the first game, don't make it count. Make sure everybody knows it's not going to count. And we're going to play again or play right afterwards. So you don't feel like if you lose, it matters.
I love hearing you say that. In my gaming group, everyone has learned that whenever I teach a game, my mantra is, the first game doesn't count. They all make fun of me for saying it. But I mean, I think that is, you got to take some of that pressure off. Like,
Right.
I've got to perform and I've got to be great my first time playing, you know?
Right.
And
Even though you
that
say it, though, people still take it seriously.
They do, yeah.
It's like,
Yeah,
it's like, wait a minute, you just changed that rule. It's a learning game. Okay, just chill out. It's the learning game. Yeah, and I think that comes into, we just kind of hinted at it there when I was talking about complexity. What do you find the right, I mean, how do you judge a game for your kids? Do you look at the box and say, and look at the age in the box? Because I think the boxes are overly conservative.
I think they must be concerned that the kids are going to eat them or something.
Yeah.
Don't you think? I mean, they when they put, you have to be.
I kind of feel like what they're saying is, in order to hand this game to a child with no instruction, he must be 14. It's almost
Right.
like, and I guess they're probably right. Like if the game says 8 and up, what I've found is you can add 2, so to your child's age when guessing a game. That's been my gut feeling on most games. So like if I see a game that's 8 and up, I'll try it with my 6-year-old.
Right.
If I see a game, it's a 6 and up, I might be able to get away with that with my 4 or 5-year-old, right? Because my daughter plays games that are 12 and up, 10 up. She's when she's 8 and 7. So it really depends. But I think really the key is but thinking about it, like my girls have been playing Zularetto for since they were 6.
Yes,
But
yeah.
they could not have taught themselves that game at 6. Do you know what I mean? Like the rules were too complicated reading them wise. But if I walked them through a couple rounds, they would get it. Now they've memorized the rules, so it's easy for them. So I guess what the manufacturers are saying, if you were just going to hand this to your kid and they're going to walk away and figure it all out on their own without any instruction, they need to be a little older. Maybe that's what they're saying.
I think you got the right perspective on that. I think that makes a lot of sense because otherwise you got to really take it with a grain of salt. Because,
Right.
I found the same thing. It seems like they over or underestimate, however that goes, what your kid's age needs to be. I know, so for instance with Luke, once he mastered Carcassonne, we moved on to a game like Castle Panic was another one we played, right?
Oh, great
and
game for kids.
Once
yeah.
he kind of mastered that, we were able to play kind of a modified version of Magic the Gathering.
Mm-hmm.
Just play with the simpler cards, that kind of thing, and learn Pokemon and some of that. Now, when he was 6, I think, or almost 6, I got Wrath of Ashardalon,
Yep.
the D&D system adventure game, right? And it's recommended for 12 and up.
Right.
And I agree. If you're just going to hand that to a kid and say, good luck, that's probably what they're talking about, right? But with some instruction, and especially since it's a cooperative game, us playing together, and because it was a theme he liked, right, and it had cool bits, and we played it a bunch of times together.
Right.
By our 4th or 5th scenario, he was able to make all the decisions for his character by himself, and eventually he was able to play the game entirely on his own. He would play it solo. He'd open his
Right.
room and he'd take a few turns and do it all. So I didn't have to manage anything. And so that's a game recommended for 12 that a 6-year-old's playing. So
Right.
you do have to take it with a grain of salt, and I think it's good to kind of push them a little bit. Once
yeah.
you know that they're getting comfortable with some of the mechanics, so many of the mechanics are shared, right? You can kind of encourage them to take it on a little more challenging game. And often they rise to the challenge, right? Because they're smart and they're growing and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. And I had the same experience with the D&D ones. I got them in much younger than 12. So it really comes down to, and again, it comes back to what we talked about earlier. If a kid is interested in something, if they really want to do it, they will figure out how to do it. I mean, that's
Right.
something you learn as a parent, often to your detriment if you're not careful. If they need to figure out how to open that front door, even though you've locked it, they will figure it out. It's only a matter of time and persistence, which kids have plenty of both, so they'll figure it out. So I think that's definitely part of the deal. And I think one of my proudest moments as a parent, and I think you can, and this goes back to what's so awesome about these games is, we taught our school near the end of the year, as many schools do, when it gets near the end of the school year, they sort of start winding down and they end up having movie days. Well, anyway, last year, the year before, they did game days and kids could bring in games. And once the kids are bringing in canon, my daughters are bringing in Zularetto and stuff, and they're teaching it to other kids. And that it made me feel so good. And they come back, and I said, and Rose, she took fishy fish in first, and she wrapped it all up. And I said, so how are you going to teach it to her? She was all nervous about it. I said, how you show me? She walked me through. I said, that's perfect. She went in there. She taught the kids. I said, did you have it? Nope. They all learned it. They loved it. They all kept playing it again and again. And, I'd love to see them teach the games to their friends now. And these are games that are technically way above the age levels of the kids they're teaching.
Yes.
So I think really once the kids kind of know that, and again, think of what you're teaching your kid about instruction. I mean, they're learning how to, technically speak to other kids and how to instruct and how to be patient and learn all that through and guide them through a process. And that's all, it's really a fantastic learning experience. So I think, again, really bringing these games to your kids and getting them to learn it, and then getting them excited about sharing it with their friends is really key. And what happens is the kids come back and the parents come back, and because my wife volunteers at the school, and so the parents come up to Nicole and saying, "My daughter said your daughter brought in this game, and where do you buy a game like that? It looks fantastic, So you're also spreading the love of the hobby to other kids and kind of showing them that, hey, there's more to these games than just Candyland. So it's really interesting to see that. And I just think it's fantastic to see the kids get out there and re-share what they've learned.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's see. We're getting along here. Here's one. You had a great topic here, Rodney, that I think we should definitely talk about, which is dealing with competition. So
yes, I'm intrigued.
The hot spot here.
Yeah. So this is definitely a challenging area, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because
I can't stand when my kids beat me. I throw a hissy fit. It's the worst. That's what we mean, right?
Right. We were like,
onions. It is.
You sunk me again and survived. Why do you keep killing my people? So how do you deal with the fact that how do you teach sportsmanship? I guess in a game, really, is what it comes down to, right? Yeah,
I've been asked this one a few times through our video series. It's competition. I mean, especially when you have more than one child, can be a real challenge. Sometimes. You do have to divide the kids up. Like sometimes you have to play certain games one-on-one, until you can teach them that losing is okay. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I mean another thing is, is to play cooperative games. If you're really having a real problem with it, like where they won't, the competition is too much for them to handle, play a great cooperative game. Where there's not that you're winning and losing together, because in a way, right? I mean, you're going to be able to model when you all lose together how you're responding to that loss, and hopefully some of that is being passed on right to them. So I think that's one way. It's tricky though, because this comes down to. I was talking to my daughter about this as well. Like, do you let your kids win games? You know what I mean? Like, do you let them win if you think it might keep them engaged in the game and avoid some of that competition problems that can creep up? And when I try to approach that, I try to think about my decisions with my kids based on 2 years from now, not 2 minutes from now. So in 2 minutes, my kid is going to lose and be disappointed.
Right.
But in 2 years, if I haven't found a way to teach them about dealing with this disappointment, I'm going to have a much bigger problem.
Right. Yep.
So I generally don't let my kids win. That said, I make exceptions if I think it's a 3-hour-long game and my kid's been doing an awesome job and I just think it's going to create that special moment for them. Then I might throw them a bone. But I think there is something around there about teaching the importance of losing and having a good attitude and all of that. That's important. And if you skip that step, I don't know. Like, what kind of gamer are you creating there? Great, they love games, but now they're going to be miserable to play with.
Yeah, no, I think
on some level.
Yeah, I think, and it was funny. Well, not funny, but when we first started playing games that were very, very simple, like the Black Pirate and stuff. There's some games that are the dexterity games that are really simple for very young kids, and so my youngest would be like 3 or 4, and the oldest would be 5 or 6, and when one of them would lose, they would cry. They would get sad. You could see the tears forming up in their eyes, and so we would have to kind of figure out how do you deal with that, and so I would sort of teach them on. Do you like playing the game? Yeah, and I said, well, people won't want to play with you if you are sad or mad every time you lose. You'll have a harder time finding games with people. It's about sportsmanship, and I explain the idea of sportsmanship and how it's the game is about the experience of having fun, and the winning at the end is part of it, but not the main goal of the game. And I think that was and it's sort of hard to convey that to kids. And so one of the things we started doing was, I noticed if there were certain games that were skill based, and obviously the older child would have an advantage over the younger. Once in a while, I'd mix it up with more luck-based games, like zombie dice or something, where there's not an awful lot of deep strategy that the younger child will get luckier with it.
Right, good strategy. That's a good idea.
And so that would work. And there's another game. There's also games that are really easy to handicap. Like there's a game called Jungle Treasure, where it's a bunch of little mini games where you're grabbing sticks and you're trying to solve a bunch of little problems in a certain amount of time. And so for the younger players, we'd always had a rule of something about doubling the timer based on your age. So the younger the player, the more time they had. So mommy and daddy had like 10 seconds, whereas the 6-year-old had 30 seconds, and the youngest had like a minute. And once those parameters were set, like, kids don't want the rules you can't break the rules in the game. And they'll notice, like, if you say everybody has 30 seconds, and it comes to the youngest's turn, and you say, well, she's the youngest, just let her go a little longer. You'll just like, no, the rule says 30 seconds. But if you, before the game starts, you make a house rule that says, if based on your age is this, your time is this, and this, suddenly you'll just like, okay, that's the rule we made, now I can play by that. So it's almost like they don't like you to bend the rules during the game, but if you set the rules up prior to the game, they're okay with that. They're very form-based, these my kids are. So that sort of worked out for us, and that sort of was a way to kind of level the playing field and get the people winning the same ratios. That was sort of how we dealt with it. But it does. I did notice also there's an age somewhere, and I found for my kids it was around 5 or 6-ish where they started understanding more the idea that losing was okay, and now they're great about it. And I don't know if it's because they played so many games, or we kind of told them that was wrong, or if it just came to a maturity level. But there's definitely a younger age level where it is tough, and they will get emotionally attached to the idea of losing. It's tough to work through that part.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've seen some examples of some of Luke's friends where it just feels like you can tell the child has been maybe a little bit coddled through the losing so much that they aren't going to lose. Like, and if they do lose, they're not going to be happy with it no matter what you tell them. So I think you're right. I think you do need to sort of steer them in the right direction around losing, encourage them that it's about the fun of playing. And if you're making the gameplay itself really fun, and hopefully that becomes the focus, then the winning and losing is just kind of like it's the epilogue on the game, really, right? It's not the whole main point. So
right.
Yeah.
And I agree with you too. That cooperative games are a great way to work through that process also, and kind of remove the competition level. Although my kids will get they like the competitive nature of games now, though. They like to get each other's face. It's kind of funny.
Oh, we were playing Cosmic Encounter the other day. I just taught them that for the first time.
Great.
And they had a blast when they realized, so we could team up and win together against Dad?
Right,
we're going to do that. We're going to do that.
Love that. I know, right? That's they love that stuff. What I mentioned, and it's the other thing too you can do. We talked about complexity, but this also helps with competition, and that is team play. When I first taught my girls Summoner Wars, I thought initially it was going to be too complicated for them. So it was actually my wife and I playing, and my oldest paired up with me, and my youngest paired up with my wife, and we played that way. And all of a sudden it was, Mommy and I are going to beat you, and if you lost, Mommy could kind of say, or Daddy could say, well, I lost with you too. It's okay. See, this is how you handle a loss. And, he said, good job. You did a great job beating us. That was a good move back there. Said,
that's clever.
We could have won. And so you're sort of sharing the failure
You're
together.
modeling behavior.
Right.
That's really good. I agree.
But also it helps you teach a more complicated game. And now they love Summoner Wars. I mean, my girls, again, that's another one that if I have that anywhere in the room, they're like, let's play Summoner Wars.
That's awesome.
With a great game. But yeah, so I think that's another great way to share. So you can turn a competitive game into a co-op game simply by making it parent versus parent with team play, right? If you have enough kids.
That's great.
So we're running along, but before the Dunkin' Donuts guy kicks us out, because he's kind of looking at us funny.
Yeah,
he always looks at us funny. I think he has a lazy eye.
That could be it. We shouldn't. Yeah, okay. What are some games? We've mentioned a bunch in this episode, but what are some games, off the top of our head, real quick, that we think are great games for sort of to get you started down the path of serious gaming with your kids?
Okay, well, actually, you mentioned one of the ones that I was thinking of, the Pokemon card game. Mm-hmm. It's one that both my kids played at different points in their lives, and it's got some complexity, it's got some choices, it's got cute little figures. If they like the TV show, then the theme is going to appeal to them. So I think that's definitely an option. I mentioned Carcassonne. Castle Panic is a great little cooperative game.
Castle Panic's great. Yep.
The D&D adventure system games, like I mentioned. You mentioned HeroScape, which was another one that I was thinking of too, because that's introducing miniatures games to them. But it's got a very kid-friendly look to it, and there's simple rules and there's advanced rules, right? So you can introduce it with the simple rules and then add in those more complex rules later. It's a good one.
Yeah, HeroScape's got great success. My brother is a big HeroScape fan, and his son has all the stuff, and we've a good success with that. And actually, another friend of ours, Ian, set up when he has a big family day once in a while. He'll set up the HeroScape stuff for the kids to all play, and they always have a great time with that. It's a great game for all ages.
And Rafe always talked about playing Descent with simplifying down that too.
Right, he actually would
his son.
He would just make it more of a Dungeons and Dragons experience. So he'd remove the Overlord concept from Descent and simply make it. I'm going to sort of role play your way through this. So here's a room full of spiders. So we'd introduce the mechanics. The mechanics were the same with the game, but there was no evil Overlord trying to beat him.
Yeah, he wouldn't be trying to beat his son. He would be trying to give his son a cool adventure.
Right. Which I thought was clever.
Yeah. It's like a role-playing experience.
Exactly. Turning it into role-playing. And so some of the ones, I think the games I've mentioned already, Ticket to Ride, my kids love that game. I think ages 6 and up. It's a great one. A lot of these games you can get into younger. The big key, a lot of these games to getting younger kids into them is the reading element. So in a game like Ticket to Ride, if you think about it, there's actually no reading in that game. Once you explain the rules, there's there's maps that have the icons on them. They can figure it all out, and it helps if you can read the city names. But you can also figure out, it's better than geography. So and also that teaches geography, which is great if you do the Europe one and the American one. So there's some great options there. Fish Eat Fish, I talked about on the show before. That game has had some major legs. We've had that game a long time, and it's just a great, simple, great little plastic components, simple kill your neighbor, kill your friend components with cards. You try to bluff which cards you've used or not. It's a really great little game. Zuluretto is really, really a good adult game. I mean, you could take Zuluretto out to the next dinner, adult dinner couples party you have, and you will have a fantastic time with Zuluretto. It's a really good game. There's a lot of screw your neighbor components to it. It looks great. But
I really got to pick that one up. That's a game I have not played. I've heard lots of great things about it.
You should definitely check it out. It's a nice game. It's got good balance, got good scoring system in it, and yet my kids love it. And the theme is fantastic. It's creating a zoo with animals. Who doesn't love that? And there's cute little babies get made, and they love all that stuff.
Yeah, it seems like you can't go wrong with the theme.
You really can't, and yet it's still it's advanced enough where you'll have a great time with adults. Even gamers, I think, will really like it. Another one I've had good success with, Super Dungeon Explorer. My kids love Super Dungeon Explorer. And that was another one we started with team play, where I would be the console, right, and my wife would be one of the heroes of the kids, and they love that, teaming up against Daddy. How cool is that? And they go at it, and that's a great one because, again, the cutesy little chibi guys, my girls love that stuff. That's all cool. So
it's
they really like
that. My daughter and son love that too. That's not to plug myself too much here, but that's the game we're playing right now in our video series at the time of this recording, and that's a good example of being able to see my son and my daughter making their own independent decisions about what to do in the game and having fun bashing up all the monsters, right? So, very visually appealing, no question about that.
Yeah, and the kids like the components. I mean, it's definitely, going back to what we talked about earlier about the game, picking a game that appeals to them, components are a big thing for kids. They love that stuff, and for me too, I'm not too proud of them. I'm a big kid. I love that.
Right,
I love all the bling, but and speaking of bling, another one I've had great success with, Battleship Galaxies. If you want to get your daughter playing a spaceship game, I've done it. Battleship Galaxies works every time. Just yank the cards out, and she likes it. She actually. And I was nervous about that. I said, "What do you think, Rose? Do you think you're going to like this idea of spaceships?" Oh yeah, she loves Star Wars, so sold, right? Huh. And then of course you mentioned all the D&D board games, and then the only other area I would say is, don't be afraid to try role playing games with your kids. It's a great experience, and it's really, when you think about it, at its core, a role playing game is just telling a story. And what is more, from your kids' earliest days, the thing they like most with mommy and daddy is sitting down and reading them a story or telling them a story. They love that. And now to have a game where you actually get to make the story with mom and dad they love it. My girls absolutely love it. And I never forget when they first were asking how it worked. And I said, we're just going to tell a story together, and you're going to tell me what your little mouse is going to do or what your little fairy is going to do, and I'm going to tell you what happens. They thought that was the greatest idea ever. And then here we're going to make it and give them time and character creation. Draw a picture of your fairy. They love that stuff. They'll draw all the gear on them. They'll draw all the stuff. Make that character. Tell me that character's story. How did she come to be? Where did she come from? They really dig into that. Kids love that sort of creative thinking process, and it's just wonderful. And again, it gets them writing and reading. And role-playing is a little trickier when they can't write. You can do it, but once you get to the writing and reading stage, that's a great game. Those are some great games to try out. Mouse Guard 2. Mouse Guard's one of those ones where the rules are probably a little too complex for younger players, but you can still sort of rip out a lot of the complexity and just sort of make it a storytelling game with in the framework of Mouse Guard. But again, my kids just love the whole Mouse Guard Red Wall things. That works out well for my kids too.
Yeah, we did a quick playthrough of Mouse Guard with the kids, and they enjoyed it. I agree. I think Andrea definitely took to it much easier, and it's during some of the conflict resolution parts of the game, that sort of thing, a little over Luke's head. But he loved the theme, and he loved the idea of it. He liked his play acting his character and getting to make those decisions, right? It's funny, when you described it, and how you were describing to your kids, like, we're going to make up a story together, and it just does sound like the best idea ever, doesn't it?
Right. I mean,
it's such a great concept.
It really is, and that's another great game for kids. Dixit. Have you played Dixit yet?
Oh, I haven't played it, but of course I've heard all about it, and it seems like a wonderful...
Dixit's another great one because you're basically making up little mini stories or short descriptions for cards. And it's just another great one to get kids using their imagination. So there's a lot of those storytelling games out there, but But really, an RPG is a great way to do it, and it's really just collaborative storytelling, and it's something that kids really excel at. Because what parent hasn't had to live through a story from their kids? So you might as well make it one you can tell together. So, any other thoughts on some games kids should try out?
No, I think that's a good rundown.
A pretty exhaustive list.
That is. Yeah. So get out there and play some games with your kids. It's a lot of fun, and that way you get to share your hobby with them and share more time with them, which is really in the end what your kids probably want most from you. It's just some time. So that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, unless your kid wants a pony.
My daughter still wants a pony. I keep going through this with her. It's awful.
Oh dear.
Yeah. This is just your way of denying that what she really wants is a pony.
I do.
What she really wants is time playing games with me.
What she really wants is time with me on her pony. Is what she really wants.
There you go. Well, that's an awkward picture right there. Russell.
Yeah, well,
that poor pony.
Exactly right.
I'm hoping that phase will pass.
Yeah, me too. I hope it does soon. All right, well, thanks again, Rodney, so much for joining us here on The Lost Chapter.
Oh, hey, anytime.
Thank you, Rodney.
And we'll look forward to talking with you more on the main show next week, so that'll be great.
Sounds good.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.